books are the original world creation, and like branding is the same thing. As opposed to advertising, branding is just like, how do I create a world that you want to be a part of, that you want to affiliate with?
If you can't see how that's a one-to-one of world creation, of design and copy and world building, then I think maybe you should probably get out of the field.
Today on Low Key Legends, I sit down with the founding team of Smith Diction, Mike and Chara Smith. Smith Diction is a design studio that creates thoughtful identities for imaginative clients like Perplexity, Ingredient AI, Living Roots Wine Co., and many, many more. In this episode, we're going to both cover the Smith, the craft of the design, focusing on iteration and what makes a successful brand, and the diction, how words give context to branding and how they breathe personality and emotion into a brand or a campaign. Mike and Chara share their strategic thinking and the process for creating excellent creative work, highlighting the benefits of working together as a couple and the value of incorporating outside experiences into the creative process. This episode will either make you want to open your laptop and get to work, or pick up a good book and start reading. But either way, let's get into the episode. Chara, Mike, I'm super excited. We have had this conversation like 4 months in the making now. So it's just amazing to chat with the Smith and the Diction and have you both come together, the powerhouse couple behind the studio.
Thank you for waiting. And even, just setting this up in general is just it's very flattering that we get to talk about design. I love to talk about design. And I don't get to do it very often. So it's really nice when I finally have the space to be like, yeah, here's all of my really weird opinions.
You work with your partner.
Yes.
My wife partner has told me not to talk about design. And now that's kind of like a house rule that we have like a 5-10 minute dinner conversation. Like, how was your day? Mm-hmm. And that's it. I can't talk about all the other bullshit that's floating around in my head as kind of ground rules. So how much kind of talking about work do you do when the workday ends? Because I'm always curious about when partners form businesses and what that relationship is like, and where does like the line stop, or is there a line and you're just always kind of in work and life mode simultaneously?
What you said there at the end is exactly true. So Chara and I met working at 160over90, which is like a branding agency in Philly. They worked on a lot of colleges and some sports teams and things like that. And so we both kind of started our branding journey as partners. And then, so we worked as partners together there for 2 years before, or I guess a year before we even started dating. So work was always like part of our relationship. And now it's just like, it's completely blurry in every single way. Just like, we've even like talked to our accountants being like, hey, when we go out to dinner, like we talk about business for the entire time. Can we put this on the business card? And it's like, absolutely. Like if you're talking about business, then like, yeah, absolutely. Like we've solved some of our hardest problems while like out to dinner or on a walk, like in a garden or something like that.
Yeah.
I love those kind of settings for problem solving. I don't know. It's something about like having a third space that isn't home or work that is kind of like transformational in, I don't know, I guess the way that ideas are generated, whether it's food. I'm not attributing it to like having a drink and then loosening up a little bit, but even like a walk in a different place or flowers, or it just seems like it does kind of bring you to a level where maybe your subconscious is working on the problem and you're not even aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think there's an element of just not being at your desk with a computer. So that helps too. When you're just like, let's not be in work mode. We're in a different mode. And that allows you to be more creative as well.
I feel like something that I've said before is that when you're on your computer trying to come up with ideas, it almost like crushes little baby ideas much faster, because you're like, oh, that has to be a thing. Let me look at it. And then like you'll Google something really fast. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's like kind of related to that. So I won't even go down a path that maybe would have diverged into something else eventually. So you kind of just lose the seed of really good ideas just because of comparison. And I think that's kind of like unhealthy in terms of brainstorming and coming up with ideas. That's kind of why we have this issue of like a lot of things are looking similar because people are sitting at their computer and they're just like, well, I'm making a postcard. Let me look at a bunch of different postcards. And then you end up kind of just remaking one you saw, even if it's in your subconscious.
Yeah, that's super true. And that's like a big problem, I think, of just having access to so many images. Maybe that wasn't so much a problem back, let's say 60s, 70s. We think about these prolific designers and creatives, illustrators, painters, etc. And where you go to like the library or you collect books, like where are you seeing things besides like going on a walk and like seeing like a beautiful piece of art in a gallery or publicly in the city in general. So I think like that's always like an interesting comparison where we just have so much access to information that maybe in some ways, like you had said, Mike, it kind of like crushes those baby ideas and you're just kills them in their infancy way faster.
Yeah. And then it's kind of sad because like I said, when we were at our first agency, we all had iMacs. So we would go into a separate room to do the brainstorming. And so like you just had paper and pencil and that was it. And then like they would basically lock you in this little glass cube until you came up with a good idea. So you would have to come up with a few ideas, you know what I mean? Just in case that when you got back to your computer, you're like, oh yeah, I was obviously just riffing off of something I had just seen. So like I said, that's kind of how we grew up and how we kind of created our process of how we approach design is through that kind of like cube gauntlet situation. So it was for the best, even though at the time it was kind of weird, but it was for the best.
It was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I still like design websites while sketching on paper, which sounds like a ridiculous thing, but I think you can test a lot faster just like doodling. And
Sure.
there's less barrier to entry with a blank piece of paper and a pen, and you can draw as many doodles as you want to try and figure something out before jumping in and making something that feels real.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, because you had mentioned how effective walking or these maybe outside experiences are. Maybe that's not something that is in your calendar, but do you add these to not maybe like as programmed as to your calendar or leave room in your day for these sort of activities, either alone or together, to have that kind of outside time or lifetime to work on problems without working on problems?
We try. We
used to do it a lot more now. We have more people working with us. We're now a studio of 5, so it's like a little bit harder to get away. But in the beginnings, we would go to Longwood Gardens and just walk around there for the whole day.
As like a brainstorm day. We'd be like, okay, we need to come up with concepts. I guess we'll just go find a garden, walk around a garden until we have good ideas, you know?
And now it's just on the way to lunch.
Yeah.
And we'll like, usually we walk like about like, I think it's a little bit like a mile out to lunch and then a mile back. So it's like, we get a solid like 45 minutes of just like kind of talking about it, talking about ideas and bouncing stuff off each other and things like that. So that was kind of how we were doing it. Now in a much more, distilled kind of way. We're not walking through the beautiful gardens as much anymore, but
yeah. And if we're ever like stuck, we'll just be like, all right, that's it. And we'll plan a dinner and then we'll just go out to dinner. And then I don't know if it's the wine or the like, we're not working. It's no pressure. But like by the end of dinner, we've always like something,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Classic like napkin drawings and all that kind of stuff, which is
like literally napkins. We have real ideas that have come from a literal napkin.
Yeah.
The city logo came up that way. So, I mean, I think there's merit in it. Just having like a little notebook on you at all times, just in case something pops up. Well, I guess we got like the Notes app and things like that for the writing side of things.
Yeah. And that's another thing. A lot of our ideas, even our design ideas, always come from words first. Like concept is always how we approach things. Like we're always having a really deep kind of discussion about how we can take something before we even sit down to start creating stuff, which I think is probably a really, really important part of our process.
Talk diction to me. What are the ways that words are important to your specific branding process?
Yeah.
And how can words be used to create an effective brand pairing with visuals?
It's interesting because there's two sort of elements I think that are really important. One is concept, like Mike was saying. I think one thing that we grew up on and really believe is that all design is better when there's like an idea, and that idea can be expressed in words, and it can also be expressed in visuals. And when those two are working together to prove out the same concept, that's really powerful. And then I also think we get a lot of benefit from the fact that we work right next to each other. So we sit at one long desk, and I'm writing and he's designing. And so our process is super collaborative, like to a level of collaborative that like I would have been really uncomfortable with like 10 years ago, because I wanted to like write it and then have those be the words, because I put all the thought into the words. But now there's a lot more back and forth of like, he'll lay something out and I'll be like, it's not looking the way that I imagined in my head. Let's rework it. Let's come up with a new thing. He'll be putting it in layout and being like, this headline is just too long. I know you love it, but it just doesn't look the way that we wanted it to. So we do a lot of adaptation. Like early on in my career, there was like draft 1, draft 2. Now it's just like, there's no document. It's just like how it looks in design. And then I'll back that up into a copy document if I have to. So because we just believe like what we're really at the core, we're in the business of communicating. So however it gets communicated, whether that's, oh, let's add an icon or let's say it with more words or less words, like that's all that matters basically.
Yeah, it's definitely, we have such a unique relationship that I feel like a lot of other people maybe can't tap into, is because we are married, because we are partners. Like I said, everything is so blobby that I'm just like, I can just be like, hey, this is the feeling I want to convey. And then she'll be like, well, talk more about that feeling. And then she'll create something with a word cloud of nothing. And she'll like turn it into something that conveys the emotion that I was looking to convey. So that way, you know, I can start with like, this is the emotion that I want. And then she can kind of back into, you know, how we create that. And it's like, a lot of people from a writing perspective are just like, oh, classics like Nike and Apple. And it's like, those actually don't really mean much of anything when you're actually sitting down to create something that's unique. And so us being able to kind of tap into each other's brains is really, really important for the creation of stuff that feels really unique and different, and takes a different kind of approach. Because it's not like we're looking at a brief. It's like we're really kind of just in the messy middle of emotional understanding, I think.
Words give context and depth to images. And I feel that if I'm looking at an image just on its own, I mean, sometimes you can immediately capture like that emotion and hit it like home, drive that really far without any words. Because like the age-old saying, an image is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes you want 5 words to communicate, you know, what an image is doing. But I feel like the art of like the concept is very much like an art school institution. And I feel maybe if you're self-taught or haven't worked with a great creative director or gone and worked in a studio and had that really like pushed on you, maybe you're just kind of focused on the physical pixels, making the thing, drawing the thing that looks cool without understanding that there's more depth to it. It's tied to strategy. And I'm curious your thoughts on the creative strategy that you're using within business and how it aligns to creating visuals that work for clients to get to a strategic result.
It's such a good point. And I feel like it's so hard. I've worked with lots of designers in my career, and one of the reasons that I love working with Mike is that he really understands strategy, and he understands when I say to him, like, that's not doing what it needs to do. It might be beautiful, but it's not doing what the client needs it to do. He understands that and can get on board with making sure that whatever we're creating with words or visuals is serving the client in the way that it needs to serve the client. Because that's ultimately like, we're not art school students. We're in the business of making stuff for clients. So that is important. And we're also really lucky that we have great clients. So we generally get to do stuff that's pretty cool. And that's not always true when you're working with like humongous clients who have very specific strategic needs. That can be a lot more complicated. We're generally working with folks who are more in a challenger position. So that allows for more creativity in terms of what the strategy is, as opposed to we are, Apple, and we just need to be really clear not to mess up what we already have going. Most of the folks we work with are more startup-y. So they're like, let's risk it. Let's do something wild, which allows for strategies that are a little bit more unexpected and fun. And that also allows for a little more creative freedom too, because when your strategy isn't so you haven't spent 2 years coming up with a new brand strategy. It's like we spent a month figuring out like, how do we want to position you against the other players? So it's a little bit more down and dirty, but it is really fun. And I think it's one of the huge benefits too, because we could be thinking about what that will look like while we're coming up with what we want the strategy to be, instead of it being in a silo. And then we're like stuck on a strategy. And then he's like, well, this doesn't work visually. Like, we are very communicative during that process too. So it's really helpful.
Sloan had said something really beautiful of like, there's like strategy through creation or something like that.
Yeah. Strategy through design is how she described it when we were talking to someone else about our process. And I thought that was nice, because a lot of it is like, we sit down and he'll be sketching something, and like, it's shocking how many times he does a little sketch in his notebook while we're brainstorming. And that ends up being the heart of the logo that we create, because it came from our initial brainstorming session. So it really isn't like we do strategy and then we do copywriting and then we do design. Like, it's all just one big messy thing. But I think that's beneficial,
and that's how it was. That's how we used to do stuff, which is interesting. It's not how we did stuff here at Smith Diction, but that's how we did stuff at our other jobs.
Yeah.
Was like siloing strategy and siloing design and siloing writing was kind of part of the old process. And part of the reason why we started Smith Diction is because of our very particular relationship, where we were like, oh, we can do this together all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was something that was really, when we were together, and when you even talked about that, like, do you guys talk about work when you're not working? It's just like, we're just thinking about it all the time.
All the time.
And that's kind of like been part of the stuff that I've been putting out, like from an agency side or a studio side. Like, we've been making like these posters and tote bags and things that are like really kind of just being like, no, this is a family business, and like, this is it. There's no other plan. So why wouldn't I spend all of my time thinking about the rest of my life? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I'm going to be able to retire at any point. And I think that like, why not try my best? And I feel like in this age of new tools, and this is, you emailed me about hot takes, and I think that this is probably one of my hot takes. In the age of where everything has become easier and easier to do, like, we have AI tools that are creating images, we have other tools that like help you get organized and do project management really fast. We have design programs where you can just write text and it will make the outline of a website. In an age where making stuff is so incredibly easy and iterative, my only differentiation is that I'm going to outwork you. Like, that's my only differentiation, is like, people are like, oh, you should have charged when you put that process document out. I'm just like, why? Like, what? Like, there's nothing in that document that is different or proprietary, or there's nothing in there that no one can do. The only difference between me and you is that, like, I'm thinking about it pretty much every second. And I even dream about things. Like, I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, I had a dream that this is what I wanted to do for Perplexity or something. And then then we end up just going to do it. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I think that there's an unhealthiness to it, but at the same time, like, what else am I going to do?
Well, I think we're in a privileged position that we get to do something that we thoroughly enjoy and is cool. And if you're working with great clients and have great relationships with those clients, then it does become this rewarding, maybe also a little vicious cycle where you're always doing it.
Yeah.
But it's creative. Most people's hobbies are creative. It's like gives us both that outlet of like almost like hobby and work. So it really is synergistic in that way, which is a little bit like amazing and kind of selfish if you're not working with your partner.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It would be a little bit more difficult to do if, like, you know, Chara was working like 9 to 5 in finance, and then I'm just like, hey, what do you think about like maybe doing a poster that has this text and then like a big rock in the middle? She's like, okay, like, what if you just shut up and and we planned a trip to do something with our family?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, our daughter is actually really creative too. So like, we'll just talk to her about our work as well, which is probably unhealthy, and she'll probably be in therapy about it later. Yeah. But, you know, she understands everything, and like, you know, she'll be like, oh, I really love the design of this sticker or something like that. And I just love that she's so thoughtful about, you know, the way that she sees the world and the way she perceives and understands things that are being sold to her. And it's really interesting for her to be able to kind of navigate those things that maybe in the 90s when we were watching commercial about Nerf guns, we were like, oh my God, that I need that Nerf gun. And like, she can look at it with a little bit more of a skeptical eye of like, why is that one pink or why is that one better? You know what I mean? So it's really interesting, kind of having your creativity and consume your entire life. But
I think that creativity is a fundamentally important thing, and that translates to design thinking. And design thinking is almost like a leadership tool at this point in time. I mean, I think there's dozens and dozens of people out there giving constant consultations and like design thinking strategy lessons to organizations around the world to try to introduce that. So I think she's probably in a unexpectedly good position for navigating big questions in the world.
Yeah, sure.
Let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'm trying to not at some point like wreck my future child by getting them too into this stuff.
I know. It's so interesting because especially because you're like, what is creativity going to look like for them? Because like when all the Midjourney and ChatGPT stuff came out, like they will be able to write their idea and see it so much faster than, you know, the process of like being like, oh, I want to draw a unicorn that has like a blue horn. You know, they have to draw that now. Or, you know, not now, but that's how we grew up, is like we had to draw that kind of stuff and it never would turn out the way you wanted. So you're just kind of like, well, that's kind of what it is. That's what I made. And now they can like just get options, which, you know, is the world going to be so much more option based? And who knows?
Yeah, it's very interesting. But I pulled this quote from you, Mike. This is just off of Twitter, but no, it's a good one. In the era of good enough, be exceptional.
Sure.
And that comes to mind with AI, because I almost feel like where the struggle and like the blood, sweat, and tears, like that's what makes something really great. And obviously you can iterate off of something that is generated by another tool, but I feel like that's where like the heart and soul really comes from, is like okay, I invested a lot of time doodling this, what did you say, like whale or unicorn or blue?
Yeah.
And I think there's like value in that and like trying to get to the result, even if you have to like struggle or muddle through it, which may open up new doors or like thoughts. It's like, okay, I couldn't draw the blue whale, but I can really make a horse. So I don't know. It's interesting that way.
Yeah. It's really, I think I always have a flip side to everything that I say. So like in the era of good enough, be exceptional, like I think that that's really an important thing to be right now. But then I also always say to like students and things that I'm talking to of like, just because you worked on something for a really long time does not mean it's good. And it's like a problem, I think, with a lot of junior folks and a lot of young folks that are kind of coming into this field is like, comparison is so much easier now than ever before. And so they'll spend a long time creating something and just show up with one option and be like, well, I worked on this for 2 days. And I'm like, well, fundamentally, it's not good. So I don't really care how long you worked on it. Maybe you should have thought about some other ways to take it. And I think that, you know, that's a really negative thing to say. But in the era of good enough, be exceptional, being exceptional comes through the discipline of creating stuff, you know, multiple versions, you know, thinking about ideas all the way through. And instead of just being like, well, this is kind of what I worked on, and so here it is.
Yeah.
The exceptional, and like you were saying, like a little bit of the struggle is kind of what makes things interesting. It makes it so you can talk about things very, very deeply and thoughtfully when you've been in the trenches for weeks trying to figure it out, you know what I mean? And so I do think that the hard work gives you a bit more of a perspective and an understanding, even if you're creating something hyper minimal or something that maybe doesn't even super wild to look at, like, but at least you thought through as much as humanly possible, and showed the options all the way through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I mean, I think there's so much that you could say about this exact topic of, I mean, along the lines of what you're saying, Mike, of how much work it takes to put into things. And even with the world changing, like, it's not as easy as some people think to just come up with a good headline. And I see the same thing with this that Mike sees with design, with writing, that like, you can't write 10 lines and then think you're going to nail it. You have to write 200 lines and you still might not nail it. And you have to keep going and keep going. But that process is so important. And even in the era of AI, even if you're having AI help you generate ideas, you still have to, it's not going to be one prompt and then you're done. You have to do a prompt and then try a different prompt and then add a different level of emotion and a different, so it's still working through what you want it to feel like, what you want it to communicate, and how do you combine, because for us, it's all about combining emotion with actual communication. So what do you want to say? What do you want people to think at the end? And then how do you want them to feel? And how do you get those both into the same visual idea? And so I think it doesn't matter whether you're talking about design or copy, it's all the same.
Yeah.
No, I fully agree. And I use AI tools mainly for communicating and writing, trying to iterate on tones of voice, but ultimately it always ends up like I'll get these things, iterate a couple prompts, take like the 2 or 3, and then rewrite them in like my humanistic way through my lens for the client. And usually it's like, okay, it looks really nothing like that, but it helped me get to the end destination.
Yeah. And I think that, there's a lot of discourse right now about like, oh, AI is taking over, doing these things. But I think that really using it as like an advantage tool, I think is a really important thing. And, we have an electric bike to take our daughter to her school. And before we did, I was riding her there on my regular bike. And by the time I got back to the studio, I was just like, I'm exhausted. But now I'm using a different tool to do the same job. And it's like, I get back to the studio and it feels great. And I barely pedaled. It was fantastic. And I think that you kind of have to look at AI through that lens of just like, let it carry some of the weight for you, but you're still the person that's doing the actual thing. And then if you start to remove yourself from the thing that's doing the thing, that's when you start to get into some really dodgy territory of like, you'll lose the humanity, and otherwise what's the point?
And the intention, I find it's so important to feel like we know what we want this brand to feel like, and therefore we design it in a certain way. We know how we want it to feel. So that's why we use the words that we use. And there are words that could be fine words, but they sound strange, or they're awkward, or they're clunky, or they're too schmoozy and like overused, or too cheesy. And you have to pick words based on not just their meaning, but also their sound. And there's so much complexity there that I think if you remove yourself from it, then you're just going to miss out on the nuances that actually make things successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the sign behind you both, and don't remove the poetry. And I think that is a beautiful, there you nailed it. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because if the words are fundamentally right, but don't sound almost like lyrical rolling off the tongue, or doesn't hit like that emotional resonance, then it's not going to be as effective, even if it's like using, let's say, the quote unquote right words. I guess the right words would be the ones that make you feel something, but in this case.
Yeah, that line comes from the Wabi Sabi book, which is one of my favorites. And I've created like 15 iterations of that. And the full line is pare down to the essence, but don't remove the poetry, which is like a very, very Japanese way of thinking about things, and just like making sure that what you're doing is simple, but it still has a story. It still has the artfulness and the experience of existence. And I think that don't remove the poetry, and having it there behind us on our videos. I have a poster over there that you can't see. Having that be around us at all times, is a really good gut check for when we're working on something or whatnot. And just like, oh, is this too simple? Or is this does this have that thing that our studio really, really wants to be known for? Like that really small piece that's just 10% different than what everybody else is doing. And I think having that around us is a really good thing to keep us on track and keep us in check for sure.
Yeah. I think we're kind of in this like era of like authenticity. Brands are trying to really communicate their purpose and value and translate that into emotion. And I'm curious how you guys are thinking about that. But how can designers and copywriters effectively communicate these without coming off as like performative or unauthentic?
Yeah.
With the brands that they're working with or creating from scratch?
It's so hard. It's so hard when you're coming up with a brand to figure out that line, especially when, you know, essentially your brief from your client is we want to feel authentic, but we want you to manufacture that authenticity for us. It's a big challenge. It's not easy. So how do you create something? And for us, I would say a huge part of it is in that concepting phase of like, okay, what is an authentic idea that feels true for this client? Like, what's that thing that makes them different, that feels not just like a cute concept, but like a real depth of meaning that sets them apart from whoever else they're trying to be different from.
And I will say there's a part of our process, which is discovery, which is where we basically do exactly what we're doing now. It's a very chill conversation, and we talk to them for an hour and a half sometimes, founders or whoever's starting this new company or whatever company we're working on. And most of the time, they'll say what needs to be said, and we'll just find it. You know what I mean? They'll say the thing if they're passionate. And I feel like one of our major things is when we're talking to people, we also do a 30 to 45 minute intro call. And if you're not passionate about it, we're not working on it. And that's just straight up how it is. Because when you work with the passionate people, they will be like, well, I'm doing this because I personally want to solve X, Y, Z, or I ran into this with my wife when she was pregnant or something like that. And when we meet that same kind of energy, we'll just like 10x it as soon as like, because we're like, that's the humanity. That's the exciting part. That's the thing that's going to get other people to buy into it. And so, yeah, I think working with partners that are not just out to make money or out to fill a gap in the market. Like if someone tells me that they're filling a gap in the market, I'm just like, no, thank you. Here's somebody you can talk to that maybe will be better to do that. But because we're not here to fill gaps, we're here to make really, really beautiful stuff.
Yeah. And I think to answer your question though, like, let's say you don't get to be so choosy about who your clients are and you're just trying to figure out how to make something good. I think one of the things that helps is to think about every client as what is the problem they're trying to solve. And that's really like comes down to strategy essentially. But if you're, I don't know, a writer or you're a designer and you don't necessarily have strategy to work from, you have to figure out what is the actual problem that this product will solve. And then you can solve the problem of how to sell it because you understand why would somebody even want this. But if you don't take the time to answer that core question of what is this actually solving, it can be very, very challenging because then the founder has an idea, but that is the entire strategy process of let's tell you not what you want, but what your audience wants and how are we going to help fill a need for them. And then you can solve the design problems and the copy problems because you know what you're trying to actually communicate with somebody.
Yeah.
I think we have a really good radar for like sniffing out the unauthentic companies out there that are either just trying to fill a gap in the market or trying to get rich quick scheme their way to some sort of profitability and then bug out. And it's just a product that's going to end up in the landfill. I think we've gotten pretty good at that. And now it seems like we're in an era of making things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, opposed to focusing on that exceptional quality. And I do think that as designers, we can help to, or copywriters as well, to help influence the companies that are doing really great work for great people and actually mean what they say and say what they mean by working on those brands and trying to push them forward with exceptional design, exceptional branding, exceptional copywriting, language, and creating something that can really launch them in a market if they're just starting out.
Yep.
Sure.
I am curious if your process is replicatable for anyone else because of your close connection. You had said that you have others in the studio, so it's not obviously just you. You said a team of 5. Do you think that tools like Figma enable the kind of working on strategy in tandem with design, in tandem with copywriting?
Absolutely. And I'll say this to I would say most of your audience is designers, not writers.
Yeah.
But one of the best things that I've ever done as a writer is slightly learn design programs. I don't need to be great at them. I'm not really a designer. I'm definitely not good at Illustrator, but learning Figma has transformed our business. So I go in, and for any of our team, I go in and I put copy into the Figma file. So then when our team, one of our designers lives in Virginia, she's never around, she's fully remote, but she can go in moments after I put it in and pull copy for whatever. I can go into her design and update copy live. If it's got a weird ending or doesn't quite fit, I can just make the edits in the design without even messing up the design. It makes the process so, I remember when it was much harder when we worked at our first job, and I used to have to beg the designers to please update the copy. Please, there's a typo. And they were so annoyed, and it was so hard. And now it's there aren't typos because I can go into the same file and fix them.
Yeah, because it's it would be in a Photoshop mockup that was in an InDesign document that was in a Keynote.
Yeah.
So you'd have to go all the way back to the Photoshop and then update the InDesign, update the Keynote after it. And it's a 600-page deck or something.
Oh,
so yeah, it's a very different kind of world now.
Now we literally will be on a call presenting to a client and see a typo, and our other designer will see it as well because he's on the call, and he'll go fix it while we continue to talk, and it'll be fixed before the presentation is done.
It is crazy. Our presentation stuff, we should probably be a little bit more professional, but we'll be in Slack or something and be yo, add a recap slide at the end. It's I'll tell Dan or Summer to be add a recap slide at the end while we're going through this. Because a client will say something big. Oh yeah, I really like what's going on in number 1. Maybe we could see it with number 2. Maybe I'll see the type from number 1 with a symbol of number 2. And then Dan or someone will mock it up. Just go mock it up.
And we'll be oh, we have that on the next slide. Ding.
Yeah, here you go. So it's really, and it's we use Figma in a much more different way than most people do. I think we use it in a much more brand oriented presentation tool, rather than UI flows and structure. We never have character styles. We never have markup styles. We never have any of that kind of stuff.
Layers are not well named.
Yeah, it's very messy. But we also have all of our assets already built in there. So we have letterhead documents. We have things that go inside of parchment folders.
Mockups that aren't even in Photoshop. They're in. So even if it's a mock-up, I can still go in and edit a copy because it's all built in Figma, which is transformational. So
yeah,
that's amazing.
With drop shadows on top of things, wall textures, all that stuff is variable, so you can change it all. So we can just move really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I've been trying to use it, even though Rogue is focused on branding and bringing those brands to life in a digital way. We use it in our branding phases, and so it'll be strategies all in one section, and then all the iterations are in one section, and it's anyone can go in there, pull stuff. I put copywriting things in there, approved lines by me, approved lines by the client.
Yeah. Nice.
And do whatever you want. Just make it look real and feel emotional for the end user, so that they can actually resonate with this brand or product, whatever it is.
And we're really lucky that we have a team that's very open to it. I've worked with a lot of designers, and many of them feel very possessive over the work that they create, which is fair. It's creative work. It takes a lot of heart to put into it, but we're really lucky. Our team is super collaborative. So we have a lot of back and forths. And I think that's because Mike and I are who we are, and we started the studio in this way. That's we just sort of merge each other's brains into an idea. But our team is luckily down for all that. So it's very they'll be working on things live. The other thing about Figma that some people might feel uncomfortable with is that we can see our team working minute by minute, in a really way that could be creepy. We try really hard not to be creepy, but sometimes we'll go in and be oh, actually, I wanted to change that headline. Can you swap this headline out? And they're not even done with the design. And so it's wild. And I feel you have to be a certain kind of person to be up for that.
Yeah, totally.
So we just love our team. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's a completely new way of designing from where we came from. That's for sure. It's really crazy.
Yeah, and there's people on my team, whether they're jumping in as like a freelancer or if they've been on a bunch of rogue projects, where they'll do like their first round of design like in something private, and then they'll move it in, because then they know I'm going to like make a million comments, iterate, change things around and do all that. So it's like they get their little private time, but then it's like, all right, from here on out, we're going to like jam on this collab and make something all together that everyone has access to. And I think that's kind of like really the power of the tool, instead of just like an Illustrator file that just kind of sits in your either Dropbox or just your private computer. And then, you have to version 1, 2, 3, final, extra final, good for client. Like it just keeps it all organized. Even if it's a giant mess, it's still organized in some way.
Yeah. And we do give our team time to like do their mess arounds without us looking. Like we're not like watching every iteration. That's more when we're building things out and finishing, like you were saying. Those early days, we just like leave people alone to do it.
It's very funny because even in Figma, like it gets really messy. And then what happens is like Chara will sit down and make a matrix first. So like all the things that are in the scope will like lay out black slides. That's like, I don't have the name and maybe some copy underneath of it. And so we'll try to fill those out. But then as we're building it, it like turned into like this scatter of like, well, these are ideas that we should do there. And then so quickly it just becomes, that file just becomes the archive.
At some point, I just rename it to archive and then make a new clean file.
Yeah.
A new page that's like, okay, let's start from scratch.
So we start with a really nice outline, and then we create another outline with the,
Yeah. Yeah. But I feel like that's fine. Like that's part of the fun is to see, that's like part of the creative process is to build something, then build another one, and then build a third one, and then move it over here and make another one. And Figma is such a great tool for that.
Sure.
And I love that even though I'm not a designer, I can still do that same iterative process. I can take a design that a team member has already made for like a website header, and then I can try out 5 different headlines in the layout and see how they feel. Yeah. And then be like, okay, team, which one should we go with? So it feels so nice to have a collaborative environment.
Now, at this point, Figma should just sponsor the episode.
Right?
So anyone at Figma listening or if someone knows, connect me and we'll make it happen.
Right.
Everyone can get paid and we'll do some free promos.
Sponsor me, Figma. Are you ready?
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
But I guess like just to bring it back to branding and tangible kind of strategy, like in a saturated business landscape, I guess what strategies are you prioritizing? What are the essential elements of a brand that you like to kind of pull and play with to get the most out of that brand? I guess, are you leaning more visual identity, or is storytelling and the concept carrying more weight?
Definitely we put more weight on the visual identity. I think part of that is because of who most of our clients are. A lot of our clients are early stage startups, and things shift a lot from like year 1 to year 4. As a startup, your positioning can change a lot. Your competitors can change. When you're super challenger that nobody's heard of versus you're starting to break through, you have to inevitably shift some of your messaging. So we try really hard not to build something in terms of messaging that's like, and here's your tagline, and that's going to be your tagline for 10 years. Like, it's probably not. Yeah. Versus a logo, which like you can get a logo early on and that can stick with you for a long time. So I would say we're probably about like 70% design, 30% writing and strategy, like the words part of it. So it's not that it doesn't exist. You still need copywriting. You still need ideas that stand behind it. Like we still do a lot of the like vision, mission, brand tone. What are the words that you're using? Now that we work with a lot of product designers, like what is the language you're using in your app? How do you describe those different things so that people know how to get around and like do stuff in the app that you're building?
We
do that, but
it's a differentiator. Like to be a small studio of less than 20 people and have a copywriter that has 15 years of experience is kind of unheard of. And so that's why it's in the name of the company. Like that's why it's Smith Diction, is because like that's the thing that makes us a little bit different. even if we're not out there being like, we're the best writers around, like the thing that's different is that like we can create a brand that has a really solid sounding tone. Whereas like another studio that's maybe just design focused or dev focused or web focused is like, that's not their concern. Mm-hmm. Their concern is just like, I'll just lay out whatever outline you send me, I'll lay it out. And for us, it's like we labor every word, every sentence, every use of how that tone interacts with the brand itself. So to have that on such a small scale is something that's, I think, a really, really important thing for us.
Yeah.
And again, I think the words do help drive the emotion home, because I mean, I think we are unfortunately in an age where people don't like to read very much on the web. And so those headlines really, really matter. Yeah. And the supporting copy, if you hook them with the headline, that really, really matters, because you only get so many shots at that, really.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, you know, with writing, it's so easy to change words too. Like on your website, you can update your website pretty easily, most websites.
Sure.
So we try really hard not to look at language that we write for brands as set in stone really ever. But there's still a really big gap between, like, if you were to ask ChatGPT to write your website, they will do it in a way that's very like, let me communicate the ideas, as opposed to let me create an emotion in your heart right out of the gate. And then I'll tell you why this product is going to do something for you. But if you can't create that emotion first, then you're just like everybody else out there. Like you were saying, we are like drowning in brands. There are so many brands out there. You can't, like, everybody's looking at their phones all the time. And 90% of it is just ads for brands, whether it's an influencer or a straight up ad. Yeah. There's so much inundation of like, you should buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this, that emotion is so important to help you stand out, because otherwise you just look like everything else and immediately you want to be skipped. So that's what we really try to do. And everything, design and copy, is like inject that sense of emotion that is purposeful emotion, but helps set you apart.
Chara, do you have any books or recommendations for ways, if there's designers out there that want to dive into this world of copywriting and think about it more and maybe add it into their toolkit to maybe try and just write better headlines for their clients, just for mock-ups or anything like that?
There's like the classic advertising books, like The Brand Gap, that are like so old now, and I haven't read it in a while, so I don't know how relevant it is. But reading some of those like classic advertising books can be really helpful. I also think that honestly, it's just like read good words, like read poetry or read a novel, like read something that's not just TikTok, because it's so easy to get like caught up in this world of short little snippets and nothing that's real, and as opposed to like a really well-crafted sentence. So I find that I'm a better writer if I'm really immersed in a novel at bedtime too. Like that just helps you realize, oh, I thought two different things at the same time when I was reading that sentence. And that's possible to then like write a headline that kicks back, because you understand that it's possible to say two things at the same time. Versus like on TikTok.
Well, didn't you say like Demon Copperhead was like the best written?
Oh my gosh, it was. But
so
what are we just begging for all kinds of sponsorships now? Barbara Kingsolver?
Is it called Demon Copperhead? Mm-hmm. Chara, as she was reading that book every day, she would be like, "Oh my gosh, I have to tell you this line. You have to read this sentence." And so it's just reading better books will help you. And even like I'm in the middle of reading Area X, which is the Annihilation kind of trilogy or whatever. And just the way that the writer describes people, I'm just like, oh, that's so like elegant, or oh, that's so brash. Like, so once you kind of see someone who's a professional at it, and people have been writing for millennia, so there's a lot of stuff to look at. But you can see the emotion, or you can feel the emotion that they're looking to convey, like how they want you to engage with a person, and they do it through words. So that, I think, is just reading really good books. Like I just finished Dune. Like I read, I think 4 of those, and just transporting to a world. Like if you can't see how that's a one-to-one of world creation, of design and copy and, world building, then I think maybe you should probably get out of the field.
Well, there's a hot take right there.
Yeah.
That's right there. You don't like reading, don't design.
No, I mean, I didn't even enjoy reading until I met you.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you were like, what's this weird thing you do at bedtime where you open this paper and look at it?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, it's interesting. I do think that, books are the original world creation, and like branding is the same thing as opposed to advertising. Branding is just like, how do I create a world that you want to be a part of, that you want to affiliate with? Yeah. So the more you can sort of understand the way that in 2 pages a book can create a world and you're like, I am in, how do you do that? Also just like read some of the masters and just read the first line and the last line of a book. They're usually very well written if it's a well-written book, and that can just teach you a lot about how to write like a really good headline.
And I need to read more not nonfiction. I need to read more fiction because I primarily read nonfiction, but that doesn't mean that they're not good writers too. It's just more practical, but I think I need more of like the emotional and kind of enjoyment in my let's say bedtime rituals there.
Exactly.
I mean, there are really great nonfiction books. What's the one sitting on my bedside table that you read, the creativity book?
Oh, the Rick Rubin book.
The Rick Rubin book.
Yeah.
That's nonfiction, but that's like, absolutely read that if you want to become a better writer or creative of any kind,
That one was really sweet. And same with Wabi Sabi, which is where Don't Remove the Poetry comes from. Those are all like weekend reads too. You can read them in like 2-3 days.
Not Rick Rubin. It's
but his thoughts are so just like very kind of flowy. And the Rick Rubin book had a lot of guff, or caught a lot of guff of people being like, well, he's doing whatever, blah, 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 blah. But the first line of the page the first line of the first page is just like, these are just ideas and thoughts that I've come across in my time working in this field. Take what resonates and throw away what doesn't. That's literally the first page of the book. And people are like, oh, this is all just like mumbo jumbo, wishy-washy. No one can be creative like this. And I'm just like, you didn't even read the first page. You didn't even read the first page. Like, that's a you problem in that situation. Like, because there are some things that completely don't pertain to me or my field or my creativity or the way I go about coming up with ideas, but you just throw it away and move on to the next thing. And that again, I think the main theme of this talk should just be iteration. Like the idea of just like, it's so rare you're going to have a good idea the first time. It's so, so rare. So where you find beauty is in, chiseling the same marble over and over and over again in different ways. And I've created 4 different versions of this Don't Remove the Poetry poster because I'm just like, oh, I like that one, but now I'm on to another one. Or, just having some constraints where you can change things and develop new relationships with typography or color or illustration. I think that's a worthwhile experiment for your own creative growth. And I think that's a really important part of being a creative person.
I've found some particular interest in almost analyzing like the hero's journey in that kind of storytelling format and applying it to branding. And I feel like it does work because in essence, branding is world building, like you had said, and something that we truly believe as well. But it's like, what are those hooks? What are those moments that gets a user to really be engaged and go on this journey with you? If you're a product company, a service company, it doesn't really matter. And just analyzing it through like writing a short script of what it is that they do and why it matters and how it connects to your life. And like, besides profit, like what's the point? I feel like answering those basic questions really helps me to get to the root of what a brand is doing and then trying to build that story around those kind of factors.
Yeah. And if you talk to like strategists, there's like a million different ways to do that. What you're talking about, like some will be like, oh, your brand needs to have an enemy. Like you're talking about the hero. So who are you going up to battle against? Like what's the thing you're trying to conquer in the world? Other strategists have different theories about how to do that. But so like I've worked with nonprofits and theirs is much more like, okay, what's the vision for who we want to be in the world? And then how do we get to that goal? So like instead of a battle, it's like a destination, like a journey to a new land. And either one can be effective depending on who your company is. But basically what you're getting at is a mantra, like a good old fashioned, how do you say, let me just no pictures, no anything. What's the story of this brand? Like, how do I draw somebody in 5, 6, 7 sentences and make them win. And I've been in rooms where clients have bought the idea on the rationale page, and before they saw the design, they said, I want that. I want that brand because of those sentences that were on the page. Ones that I've written and ones that other people have written too. So this is not just about me, but that's possible. It's possible to just have a series of words that sells someone on an idea, on a brand. They say, I want to work for that company. I want to be that company. I want to buy that company, whatever. So don't underestimate the power of words if they're really well written. And for anybody, if you're like a founder or a designer, if you can write that out and say, wow, I myself want to buy it, then that's a pretty powerful thing. And then it'll be much easier to design to too, because you know exactly what you're trying to communicate.
Sure.
But that reminds me of something else that Mike says, that this just advice is for writers or designers, but you say this to our team all the time. And I think it's such a good piece of advice for anybody who's designing, writing, anything, is make what you want. We have postcards that have this on it. It's like, are you interested? Do you want to buy that thing? Like, do you like the way that looks? If that was in your social feed, would you tap the button? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is no, then keep going. Like, you need to think like you're a person, like you use your own brain. Like, you might not be the target audience, but you're an audience. Yeah. So make something that makes you want something. And then that's a pretty good place to start.
Do you intentionally work with brands that you, I would imagine, have some connection to or would want to be in that audience? Or do you often have a balance of like, okay, this has no bearing on my direct life, but I can see how someone would want to be a part of that group?
Totally. Yeah, I would say most of our projects are situations either that we want it, we, have someone who is currently experiencing it, or, we can put ourselves in their shoes really easily. Especially post Perplexity, we've talked to so many AI companies, and like they'll come in and be like, oh, I'm making AI for so-and-so, such and such. And I'm just like, I don't think anyone needs that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
to me, that's also the power of good writing. So like some of of our clients are super much, I'm like, yeah, that's a hotel and I would like to go to that hotel, or that's coffee and I would love to buy that coffee. But one that comes to mind is we worked with Anterior, which is like for healthcare payer organizations, aka insurance companies. Like, we're not the target audience. We don't work at insurance companies. But their pitch to us was compelling enough that I could immediately feel like I was a nurse who was working at an insurance company, and I understood the challenge of what you were giving me. And I was like, actually, I want that product if I put myself in their shoes. So I think that that's one of the things that sets a really good founder and a really good brand manager apart, is the ability to tell that story in a compelling way that says that anybody can say, actually, I do need that. If I was doing that job, I did need that, even if you're not doing that job.
Mm-hmm. Can we look at Interior as a case study, if you will, and dive in a little bit? Obviously, you do really, really in-depth case studies, but looking at that brand, I don't think healthcare in any way, shape, or form. So could we touch on some of the, maybe like the inspiration, the creative strategy, and how you got to an end destination that felt really unique within the space and really cool and dope at the same time?
Yeah, that was one of those ones where we were like, I was banging my head against the wall for like 3 days. I was like, I don't know. Like, it's like insurance. Like, who's selling insurance is really challenging. And so we literally had to ship our kid off to her grandma's house and go out to dinner so that we could just drink a glass of wine and figure it out. And the strategy was really rooted. There were 2 different directions, and they were just really rooted in, we like to, if we can, boil it down to like 1, 2, or 3 words. Mm-hmm. And so one direction was just all about flexibility. Like, how do you, for a nurse who's scared of AI, and you're like, I'm a clinician, I'm the person who's deciding whether or not like this person gets their MRI paid for. What helps you feel really comfortable with the tool is, wow, you have so much more flexibility to make the decisions that you are empowered to make, to like exercise your own knowledge of healthcare, because this tool just makes it so much easier. It's so flexible. And so that was like one idea. And then the other idea was all about focus. So like, you're a nurse and you are distracted by a million things. You have a million things to do. You're supposed to get through a certain number of cases every day. Everybody's in a hurry. How do you focus on what matters most? How do you look at a case file and in moments immediately tell what matters and be like, oh, I don't need to see this person's 40-year medical history. I can tell exactly what matters for this approval right now. And those were the two ideas that we basically built both of our directions on.
And then their PR agency wrote something really sweet about that credit card situation.
Oh, yeah. This was not my idea, but it was great. The PR agency that was working on some things sort of in tandem with us described it like, what is Interior doing? You know how when you go to a grocery store and you pay with your credit card, imagine if that was a 2.5 day process to be approved that, yes, you can have the credit to pay for these groceries. That's ridiculous. Instead, it's a moment. It's almost instantaneous. Really quickly, it shoots a note to Visa. Visa says, yep, they're good. And then it says approved. You can have those groceries and take them home. Like, why isn't pre-authorization for an MRI that quick? You're sitting in your doctor's office. He says, I want to order you an MRI. He types it into a computer. And then moments later, he says, okay, great, you're approved. When would you like to schedule that? Like, that's how quickly that pre-authorization should happen, just like a credit card. And that's what Interior is trying to do. So I thought that phrasing was like, I didn't come up with it, but I was like, what a lovely analogy.
Yeah. And then honestly, from a creative standpoint on that project, they were just like the sweetest people in the entire world.
Wonderful.
And we were working with their founding designer, Andy. Is his name Andy? And he kind of was just like, we want you to guide us through this process. He was like, I'm a really good collager. I'm a really good person that can take a bucket of tools and make a brand. And I know that you guys can give me a really responsible bucket. You know what I mean? And so they were just really, really open about being a challenger, which we've talked about a lot in this call, and being super unique. They wanted to stand out in the AI world. They wanted to stand out in the medical world. They wanted to stand out in the insurance world. And the other thing that was really incredible is that they're all doctors.
I know.
And
they're so smart.
So they're really, really smart.
Really smart. But also,
that means they're also really good at delegating.
They are really good at delegating. And that was really important. But I also think they were really smart in that when we were presenting designs to them, they were capable, and not everyone is capable of doing this, but they were capable of looking at something and saying, I like that, but this is the right direction for who my audience is. Like, I know who I'm talking to, and they're going to feel more comfortable with this. And so they had that ability, which allowed us to do a lot more with the whole brand, because they weren't worried about what their own personal preferences were. They were worried about what was going to be effective and help them grow as a company, which is what ultimately our job is. So it was really nice work.
Yeah. And then to kind of piggyback on that idea that Chara was talking about of focus, like with those kind of extruded kind of characters and, the logo having these cool light trails and the medical diagrams also having these cool kind of vibes. That was based on the idea of focus. So like they're kind of like motion blurs, but then they're kind of stopping on this beautiful moment. And then the color scheme is based all on the vernacular of MRI scans, of CAT scans, of all those different things where the colors are a bit more like, saturated and kind of in these weird pockets. So all that stuff was rooted in a fundamental truth of the brand, what the brand wanted to stand for.
Yeah. And if you look at the work now, you think, oh, this is all about focus, like you can see it immediately. Like of course, that's what the idea is behind all of the work.
And luckily that one in particular, it's a good case study to talk about because it is so tied to our like USPs, like our unique situations there. Like one direction was very, very tied to focus. The other direction was very, very tied to flexibility. So like usually it's not as cut and dry.
Absolutely. As that. Yeah. If you look at some of our other brands, it's like, I can kind of see how that was rooted in that idea.
But I will say for Interior in particular, to kind of circle all the way back of like, hey, this isn't really a typical space that we would see ourselves in. We had to set up a parameter to aim at. So an outside parameter, outside kind of North Star for us as non-consumers of this thing to really focus on. And then a project where we might be the customer, we're kind of just like, we can kind of wing this one a little bit. You know what I mean? Like we can kind of like,
that's true.
We can kind of just go along as we're going and kind of making it up as we go along because we are the person who is consuming or interacting with or really engaging with this thing on a daily basis because you can kind of just put yourself in that position immediately.
Yeah. And there's also, we clearly have hit a note because we're talking a lot, but I'll continue to talk. Depending on who the client is and what you're doing, there's different levels of like strategy and concept that we bring. So an Interior who's like a challenger brand that wants to become a big national brand that's up against some really big players in the space, you need a lot of concept to carry them through the next 3 years to help prove that out, versus like we have a winery client and like, what's the concept? Wine is lovely.
Wine.
You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't need to have
The concept
this,
is wine.
There is obviously more than wine is lovely. It's not their USP, but there is a little bit of concept behind it, but it's not the same level of like, we need an idea that we can latch onto for the next few years.
And the wine stuff is just as fun, just as much depth as Interior does.
Yeah.
But it just came a bit more easily because we loved the wine. It was very good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think there is something unique in there because once you get past, like, let's say that early startup stage, there is a balance in branding of consistency versus innovation. So I'm curious if you in your USPs, and that's, I'm assuming, unique strategic positioning, are thinking about the consistency in the elements that carry through for a long period of time versus when it's time to innovate or when you can interject innovation into that brand.
From a messaging standpoint, for sure. And we like tell our clients that pretty straight up of like, here is your mission and your vision should change. They're designed and written to last you for a long time. And unless you dramatically change your business positioning, like they should pretty much be solid.
Well, can you do the thing that you do in our mission and vision statements? Like say the things that qualifies them?
Of like, yeah. So it's like, what's your vision is like the world that you want to see. Like, what are we trying to create? Like, for, Interior, it would be basically like, we want a world where pre-authorization is as easy as a credit card transaction or whatever. And then your mission is like, okay, but I'm a new employee. It's my first day at Anterior. I sit down at my desk and like, how the hell do I do that?
Yeah.
So what do I actually do on a day-to-day basis that brings that vision to life? That's your mission. So it expresses it in a more practical, like, what are we doing? We're using AI to make pre-authorization a more effective tool.
So you can sit down and actually look at a sentence and be like, I can actually do that, rather than the vision, which is just like, I'm a piece of that. So having those fundamental things help us in the beginning, like help us understand the lenses of which to look at statements like missions and visions and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, you had a different question, but I thought we would kind of preemptively talk about how we look at mission statements, vision statements, which are technically like strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then underneath that, it like basically you build like a little tree and you're like, this doesn't move, this doesn't move, this doesn't move. But then you have your brand pillars, which should probably last you maybe not as long as your mission and your vision, but like until you grow to add a new arm or acquire a new business, they're pretty good for this business model you have now. And then you have headlines that can change tomorrow. So there's like there's a ladder. And down at the bottom, it's like your CTA can change 10,000 times, and that doesn't necessarily it shift your business strategy at all, whether it says like get focused with Anterior or whether it just says learn more. Like those are both fine CTAs in certain instances and have nothing to do with like your core positioning.
And something that I think is like a really important note to talk about, and this is something I love talking to every designer about, is the idea of like, how are we going to approach variability in the age of screens, in the age of video and things like that. And I am of the camp of, I love logos that change. Like if you look at Airbnb, when they announced that a long time ago, they had like a whole bunch of different kinds of things. That was 10 years ago now. But they had a whole bunch of different kinds of like versions of their logo. And it still kind of fundamentally resembles the same logo. But I do think that there's room we don't live in the Coca-Cola era anymore. We don't live in those times where like having this super strong symbol was going to be the thing that people recognized on the shelf or whatever. Like now we live in the age of just like maybe a TikToker like brought it up one time and like hand drew it on a piece of paper and held it up. Like there's so much space for logos to change and evolve and be still fundamentally the same thing, but how do you still speak in all these different places? Because if you look at Smith Diction, when you follow Mike Smith 187 on Twitter, you're not signing up for the Smith Diction vibe. You're signing up for my really kind of like my hot takes and random thoughts and things like that. But then me on Instagram, that Smith Diction, is very different. It's a very, very different way of speaking. I have a different audience there. Like, it's just having your identity being able to change through audiences is going to be crucial for the future of companies. And I think that the people who are not thinking about that are going to be left behind of just like, well, we stuck to our strategy. We stuck to our mission for 5 years. Why didn't we become the best? And it's like, you didn't become the best because you missed out on 50% of the population, or you missed out on an Asian audience. You missed out on a European audience because you weren't speaking to them in their tone, in their language, in their platform. And I think that the flexibility of brand in the coming years is going to be unbelievably interesting for brand designers to sort of digest and kind of deconstruct and reconstruct systems around that. Global positioning will be insane.
Every touch point is changing. The mediums in which we see things is changing, and will continue to change as new technologies come out. Screens will dissolve into different interfaces or whatever we want to do, like with this advertising, marketing, branding space. So all of that is new, uncharted brand territory and how we communicate. And we can't predict the future, but I would say that there are some elements that are always tried and true. I would put your tone of voice, your vision, values, missions into those camps. Yeah. Are there any other elements that you think will always remain timeless and essential in a brand or branding or marketing in general?
You have to put logo in there, even though Mike is like, let's do logos that change. Like, the truth of the matter is, like, you have to have a thing that exists as your avatar everywhere you exist. Like, that's a thing that you need. And
there just seems to be a little bit less preciousness around that very particular kind of thing. It's just like, when we create brands, most of the time we're creating like 10 sub marks.
Way too many, yeah.
Way too many, but like, I'm just obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with like, if you're on like YouTube Kids, like, is that like a fun like cartoon version of your logo or something like that? Like, you just need to be able to be less precious and less like by the book. And but at the end of the day, there still is a symbol that is holding it all together. I think it's the medium of the symbol that changes.
Yeah, totally. And I think all the things you mentioned about like a brand strategy of like values, mission, vision, all that stuff, like your brand tone. Like, I'm not rewriting people's tones every year just because they got a little bit bigger. You want that to last. I was just yesterday updating a brand book for one of our clients we've had for a long time. And I was like, let me take a look at their tone, since I'm just like making some other visual edits. And actually it's still relevant, even though I wrote that 6 years ago. Like, it hasn't changed. And sometimes, depending, it can change. Like, it's not something you need to hold so preciously that you're like, we can never adjust our tone, because the way that people talk changes all the time. So you have to change the way you
write. A new competitor might come in and be faster, be more convenient. And like, you're like, our tone was convenience.
Right.
Which there's like 3 things that like you're never supposed to do. It's like, you're never supposed to talk about fast. You're never supposed to talk about convenient. Easy. And then there's like another one. Yeah. It's like, there will always be someone cheaper. There will always be someone faster. And there will always be someone that's like
easier, cheaper, faster. Anyway, the point is, it's like, if that's all that you are, then you don't actually have a brand identity.
Yeah.
And your brand identity is like what makes us different and interesting beyond the price tag, beyond that. Those could be brand attributes. Those can be things that help set you apart, but that's not like the core of who you are.
I mean, have you seen this thing where they're like in putting digital price tags on things at like Walmart, so they can charge surge pricing? So if like there's a hurricane, they can charge more for water.
They can just instantly make water really expensive.
So who knows what the next world is going to look like in terms of that kind of stuff.
Or they can be like, our bread stock is low, so bread is
going higher. Yeah.
This just totally shifted the conversation.
There's a world that you can't even imagine right on the cusp of where we are currently existing in terms of like how people are putting us into buckets. I think that we are living in such a weird time where everyone wants us to be one-dimensional as possible right now, because that way they can sell to you faster, easier, and more conveniently to their strategy. Like, they want you to be a single flat person as much as humanly possible. And I think that's what we're seeing in the younger kids, kind of with like, non-binary and all that kind of stuff. The next generation is just like, how dare you define me?
Yeah.
Write up an audience slide about what my attributes are.
And I'm just like, like I love really corny pop punk music, but I also love really thoughtful books. You know what I mean? Like it's impossible to put someone into this camp. And I think this comes into the politics we're seeing. And like everyone wants to be like, you're a Trump supporter, so therefore I have no common ground. We have no common ground at all. And I think that there's this really, really dangerous world that we're getting into where we're just flattening humanity. And it's just so ugly, and it's dividing us more than anyone could even imagine. I think like even, I'm just like, people are so complex. That's the whole thing. The whole thing. We're really, really complex things. That's how we got to where we are. That's why we walked out of the cave. That's why we walked into the land. Like, we're weird things. Let us be weird.
And even like while we were in that cave stage, we were doodling on walls and chipping artwork into things. So like there's some elements that never change. And then there's a lot of complex emotions and thoughts that change. But ultimately, humanity's always been weird and wonderful. And you have to factor that in if you're doing something strategic for an audience or a group of people that identify maybe with certain things, but maybe not are all the same.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be more of that inside of strategy. There needs to be, and that's what I'm getting at when I'm talking about the, logos changing to our audiences and things like that. It's like, it's not just the logo. Like, I think that you need to be defining or trying to not define very particular, like we're only going after one thing or we're only going after one type of person, because I feel like you'll just shoot yourself in the foot. But I will say, in the beginning stages of companies, there are moments where that is really important to focus on one individual thing.
Yes. Well, now we get to audience definition, which is actually a very important thing when you are starting a company or doing any kind of branding. Audience definition is really important. But I also agree with what you're saying that like, I've been in those meetings with strategy presentations where there's this like incredibly detailed profile of a person down to like how many hours they spend on TikTok every day and like what color shoes they wear. And you're like, that's such a, like you're saying, it's like a flattening, like a fake character. It's almost like if AI were to develop a character, it doesn't have that reality, because the truth is, even if your target audience is very specific, like anterior, you're only talking to people who work for payer organizations, which is like a very niche audience. And you're only not even talking to everybody. You're talking to the end user and you're talking to the buyer. And there's like, those are only two jobs at a very big organization. But all of those people are still different. They like different kinds of TV shows. They wear different kinds of clothes. They live in different places around the country. So to try and one-dimensionalize people is a little bit silly. And that's why when we write a strategy, we try really hard to focus on the problem. So you need to understand who is the person, because that can help you understand what their problem is. Like moms have different problems than 17-year-old boys. And so, of course, it's important to understand whether your audience is a 17-year-old boy or a 45-year-old mom, because they have different problems every day.
Yeah.
But it's about the problems. It's not about like their shoes or where they shop,
Yeah. And can I say something that's the complete opposite side of that as well? Like, I think that the notion that design needs to be for everyone or something needs to be designed for everyone is also problematic.
Absolutely.
I think that you lose a lot of emotion, you lose a lot of compassion and a lot of community building when something is too vanilla. Like I saw a very funny tweet recently that was like, UI has become so systematic that like you can be good at just following a system now and you have a career. And so now creativity in UI design is almost dead because of that. And I think that there is a beauty in niche products. Like, I grew up as a skateboarder in New Jersey, and, I didn't want to be associated with anything mainstream. You know what I mean? And I feel like that is such a cool thing. And there was a coolness to that. And I think that there is a really nice place to be of exploration of like making a product for a singular kind of situation. And I think that if you really just need to use judgment, and I don't think that you can go out here write some think pieces all about the best way to do it. You just need to have a good judgment on, is this meant to be for everyone? And do I need to follow the rules of the government or best UI practices or best branding practices? Or do I make something that's just like really funky and really strange? And I want to talk to those 10 people in Missouri.
Yeah.
And I think that you just have to be really thoughtful about that kind of stuff, because that's when the interesting work gets created. Otherwise, we just go into this TikTok loop where everyone just copies everyone. And then the second someone does something interesting, the second Charlie XCX made a puke green album cover with blurry Arial in the middle, now it's everywhere. Like Goldman Sachs put a thing out or something that had like, I'm looking for a brat in finance, which is mashing up like 2 different memes, which is classic. And but she did something, and now everyone's like, oh yeah, we'll just do weird blurry type. And she was that's not the point. That's not what she created it for. She stood for something, and then everyone else is like, oh, I stand for that too. I stand for that too. I stand for that too. And I think the lesson to be learned there is just like stand for something somewhere at some point. Like sometimes you don't have to, and sometimes you're making a product that needs to be accessible. Like I need my Airbnb to work and to look good when I'm like arriving at 2:00 in the morning. You know what I mean? But I don't need my other weird apps that are like super, like Dispo Camera or something, who I thought did a great job of doing some really wild UI. But yeah, I mean,
the number of companies out there whose audience is actually everyone is like
so narrow.
1%.
Yeah, so
like
narrow.
There are things like when we were working on Perplexity, it was really hard because we were like, the audience is actually everyone.
Everyone
like,
on the planet.
Google's audience is actually everyone. Mm-hmm. There are companies like that, but there are very few, and most of them are very big. So the chance that for any designer or writer who's looking at this podcast, the chances that they're working on one of those brands is very low. And more likely, it's that you need to figure out who your niche audience is. And if you can win them over, then you can expand from there. Sure. But if you're trying to get everyone, you're not going to get everyone.
Yeah.
And more likely, you're going to get no one.
Yeah, more likely you'll get no one, which is, it's sad. Like someone would open a product or something and be like, oh yeah, well, this kind of looks like everything else, which I guess is like, okay, like you feel comfortable, right? And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. If you feel comfortable going to a product, you don't want someone to feel uncomfortable. But make them a little bit uncomfortable.
A little
Exactly. There's differentiation, there's niching, and often a lot of companies are founded by charismatic figures who are super into the thing that they started their company around. Mm-hmm. Not often are you finding the people that are like, yeah, I know that there's this really big need in the market, and I know that I have the resources to do that. And I'm going to be the CEO, but I want someone else to handle the creative. That's like a very particular thing. More often than not, you're getting like the person who's super passionate, or the team that's super passionate. They want to make a difference, and they can lean into those differentiating factors, or know that they don't know how to do it themselves, but want to work with a team that can differentiate them. At least this is my experience, because that's what we do. And that's a lot of what you are doing as well, based on this conversation. And this is leading to something. How do you think you can encourage that bravery to push to the more strange places, to garner a little tension in the design and the tone, to create those ideas that are game changers that ultimately people like the Brad album will want to jump on and be like, yeah, we believe this too.
The thing I say to every single kid, every single college kid, every single person I meet, I will say this very particular thing of just like, I know you're a good designer. So when you sit down to do a project, set a timer for 15 minutes, make the thing that first comes to your head. Just make it and just be like, okay, now put that away. And I think that this, you can only create excitement through iteration. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you did the job, you're like, okay, I was solving for X. I solved for X in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour. Here it is. And it's beautiful. It's simple. It does the job. Now that you have that, you can present that to your client later. Now it's time to work on the thing that pushes the boundary. And then you have that safety net. You've designed your own safety net, and you are ready now to push the boundary of your own kind of career. And you can do that now because you're a good designer and you have that safety net. And I think a lot of people just dive in and they're either like, I'm going to create the safety net now, and that's the only thing I create, or I'm going to go really, really wild. And then they present it to the client and they're like, the client's like, what the hell is this? Like, this is not what we asked for at all. Like, now you don't have your safety net, and now you kind of are second guessing your judgment, you're second guessing your capabilities. But I think the most important thing to do is to create the space where you can explore and feel really, really excited to explore. And I think that comes from a lot of time management. That comes from a lot of like product management of just like, you need to be working on things where you have the time to solve that problem really easily and quickly, and kind of how it feels in the regular zeitgeist. And then you need to have two other weeks to do some wild, weird shit where you're messing with blending modes, you're scanning in textures, you're on Pinterest, you're on Arena or Save or something like that. And you're really trying to push the boundary into a territory that makes you feel uncomfortable. You're like, oh, I'm learning something. I'm in Spline, I'm in Blender, I'm like making 3D objects, I'm in Endless Tools or something like that. And that is how we ended up creating Anterior. Was like, someone told me about Endless Tools and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can make 3D logos of my own. And then I ended up putting them through Photoshop filters, and I ended up putting them through all different kinds of things. And so that only came because we made the really nice, clean, simple thing first. And that I think is in a very, very important part of the process that not a lot of designers are scheduling time for themselves to do, which at the same time, the world is moving so fast. Yeah. Like, designers are being asked to create identities in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and like 1 week. We're doing sprints in 1 week. And the only reason we can do those sprints in 1 week is because we're crazy.
Well, and I think that, this is not me as a writer. This is more me as the studio manager, which was my other job, is I think what you just said at the end is so important, which is making sure that design teams have the time in their schedules to mess around, and making sure that people are using that time well. I think there's a lot of challenges with young folks, especially young designers and writers. Yeah. Time management is a real skill, and it's really hard, and you have to work on it and get good at it. So when we build our schedules, we make sure there is time in the schedule for those things to happen, for there to be days where the team just messes around with something that they've built and see like, okay, great, you have the thing. We could present tomorrow, but we're not presenting tomorrow. Now, tomorrow, I want you to spend the day doing some weird shit. And then that often is where like the favorite things come up. And then the client is like, that was my favorite thing that you made. Yeah. Because it was the time when there was no pressure to make something great because you already had what you needed.
And even if it doesn't become a favorite thing, it becomes an avenue to dive into later, either for our own work or for anything else, like Endless Tools that started through Anterior, and now we've tried to use it for like everything.
Yeah, so like worst case scenario, you did some cool exploration and learned a new tool, or you thought of a new way of treating something in Photoshop. So it's not a bad thing. It's time well spent, even if it's not the thing
like we even bought like a bitmap texture pack for Photoshop for one of our clients, and they're like, "Oh, we hate that." But now I just used it. I just used it on a poster that we're making, and I just used it, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually like a perfect thing." And so you're kind of collecting these little gems as you go, and you'd be foolish to think that you don't need to do that. Yeah. And there's always a plugin or something that can change your perspective or make things happen really easily or something like that. And you just have to explore like every single avenue. In my first internship, I had these two bosses. One guy was named Dre and the other guy was named Oscar. And they would just be like, hey, we saw an HDR photo. This is 2009. They were like, or 2008. They were like, we saw an HDR photograph on the internet. Can you figure out how to make that? And I was like, sure. And then I had 8 hours to reverse image search this thing, figure out how to make HDR photos and all that other kind of stuff. And, that kind of idea was instilled in me as a 18, 19-year-old kid of just like, someone can hand me something and I can go figure out how to make it. And now I still do that. I like see stuff and I'm like, that is so cool. Like, how the heck did that even happen? And I feel like a lot of people are also scared to ask people how they made things. And so I just email people and I'm like, hey, how'd you make that?
You put it on Twitter. You
That's
did
true.
this the other day. He's just like, dear Twitter, how do I make this? And then people like answer him.
Oh yeah, that was really cool.
That's
yeah,
cool.
That was really, really cool.
Ask the internet.
Yeah, like I put it on Twitter. I put up this, it was like a weird gradient orb thing. And then Matthew Smith ended up trying to build it. He posted like a 20-minute blog post of him trying to make it. And then at the end, he was like,
did pretty good.
He did pretty good. But at the end, he was just like, oh yeah, like I still couldn't do it. And then like, yeah, like that was really cool. Yeah. I'll just put it on Twitter and a lot of people will help. I know that platform is kind of dying for people just getting started and whatnot. If you don't have an audience already, it's harder to get that kind of response. But wow, yeah, that was really incredible. And yeah, like I'm still going through Instagram. I have a folder of tips on Instagram where like all the people are like, oh, this is how you make a radial gradient in Illustrator. I'm like, that's not how I do it. And then I save it for the next time that I'm working on it. So now I just have like a resource of just folders and folders of videos of people being like, oh, this is how I make vector halftone gradients that are live in Illustrator or something like that. And, right now, more than ever, all of those things are easily searchable, easily findable. So you have no excuse as to why you can't make something.
Yeah.
Today's experiments are tomorrow's projects in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. That's a good line.
And
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, that's something that we try to do. I'm sure many, many people try to do. It sounds like you're doing the same thing where like you learn something, you skill up, you try it on the next thing. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you're refining your process or your skills there. And then like 3 projects down the line, it's just like, oh yeah, that totally worked. That was a slam dunk.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And for the, writers out there, like my only advice, because you're like, okay, but I'm a writer. What's the new skill? If you're ever facing writer's block, my advice is to write something different. So like, you're like trying really hard to write a mantra and it's not happening, then like, okay, skip that. Write a character profile. Imagine you're writing a novel, profile the target audience and like describe them in just a few paragraphs of like this person and why they're confused and what they need help with. And then that will help like unlock their problem and their solve. Or like, oh, it's not working. Like, okay, write it as a Dr. Seuss poem and then see like, it will just challenge you in a different way. So like, okay, fine, throw that away and write something different.
Even if you're not doing that, like, or even if you don't want to do that, just throw that into ChatGPT or something, like as a prompt of just like, write this kind of audience in a Dr. Seuss thing. And then like, you'll see what comes out of it. But you know what I was thinking when he was asking about resources? The 100 Monkeys name thing.
Oh, 100 Monkeys. They're like a naming studio. They're great.
Yeah.
And they have, what was that?
No, are you saying their book?
Their book is great, but they also
have a game that like helps you name your company, which truly Anterior used it to come.
Anterior did it, yeah,
which is like so cool. And so it's also like I'll flip through those cards sometimes, even though they're about naming. It's like think of a cliche, think of a this, think of that. So it just gets you to think in different ways, which is really fun.
That is a really great resource, and click the links below. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but ChatGPT, I use ChatGPT too sometimes because sometimes when I'm feeling like I'm not a good writer, I'll get ChatGPT to write it, and I'm like, well, I'm better than that. And then I like take their thing and like fix it, and then you're like, but then you're not starting with a blank page, which can be intimidating. So
there's one question that I did have about the business, the studio itself. You said that you're up to 5, and I'm curious what success looks like for you both personally as well as the studio. And does growth fit into that model, knowing that it is a family-run business?
Yeah, we talk about this. So Chara and I go away every 6 months. We go to the Catskills or something, and we literally talk about this every single time. And we're going to the Catskills on Monday. So
for this reason.
So you're catching us at a really kind of like off time where maybe we lost a little bit of the thread. But I would say success for us just looks like, maintaining what we're doing currently. Like, I think we're working on a lot of really interesting stuff. We're making stuff that I'm really proud of. We're not taking on many projects that are just for the money. And I think as the growth of the studio, we have talked about like 10 people being kind of the goal or the dream. But as we got to 5, we're kind of like hitting the wall a little bit on like, okay, we're at me, Dan, Summer, and Tully for design. So there's 4 designers and 1 writer. I think now anyone we hire outside of this, it has to be outside of design, which is something I feel extremely uncomfortable with. And that is a really tricky part of the growth. We have an amazing accountant that kind of acts as our CFO. So we don't have to ever worry about finances in that situation. But like right now, Chara runs the business. She also is sending out new business leads. She's doing invoicing. She's doing client management, client services. I'm doing kind of like new business and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I think the heart of the question though is like, you know, Mike, when we started the business, the reason we started it was because Mike didn't want to follow the traditional like designer to art director to creative director to I'm never touching an actual computer path. Like he didn't want that for himself. He wanted to always be a designer. And I remember when we started the business and you were like, I was like, oh, you should have a cool title. We own this business. You can be whatever you want. And he was like, I just want my title to be designer forever. Yeah. And I was like, that's such an interesting thing. And I think that what we're hitting up now that we need to talk about next week is basically how do we grow without forcing him into a creative director role where he can't continue to design.
Yeah. When I get grouchy, it's when I'm creative.
It's when you're creative directing as opposed to designing. So that's just a challenge that I think every small studio probably faces of like, and there are some people who love creative.
I was going to say, there are some people who are just like fantastic creative directors. Yes. Like we had a friend that we worked with at 160, her name is Jenny Tondero. She's like the head of like Nike Kids or something now. She was like born to be a creative director. She can encourage a group of people to get behind her and to get behind like an emotion and a movement that I just don't have. Like I'm so much more like boots on the ground. Like I'm with you in the trenches and we can build camaraderie that way. Yeah. Rather than like a fearless leader type. I am not a fearless leader type. I want to sit down and do everything all the time, which is not a good creative director trait. Yeah. And we're 9 years into the business now and I'm big enough to admit that I can't do that well. I can try my best to be helpful, but at the end of the day, like the people that we hire and the people we work with, like I'm kind of like, you're an adult. I hired you for a reason because you're amazing. Do the amazing stuff. And I'm giving you the space and the time to do that. I don't want to weigh too heavy on your creativity. Yeah. It's hard because at the same time, the studio is our studio. So like I want it to look like it came from us. And so it's such a really, really wishy-washy kind of space for me. And I've been there professionally for the past 3 years. So. Yeah, it's tricky. It's really tricky. So I think that the short answer is we do want to grow a little bit, but we don't have ambitions to be like a huge agency ever. Like we always want to be a small niche like boutique design studio. Something that blew my mind the other day was like Kodo is only like 8. And I was like, think of them as being big. I was like, my studio was around before them. Like, well, what blew my mind was how big is Order? Oh, they're like 4 or 5. They're like people. 4. Yeah. I thought in my mind Order is huge, but they are not. Yeah, so it's size like doesn't matter. Yeah, when you look at these people, you might hold them in these lights of just like, oh yeah, they're like huge or whatever. But then like Order is doing like the most beautiful subway systems, and it's like 2 people working on the project. Yeah. And I think that there's maybe a beauty in that. Yeah. And if you haven't talked to Kevin Tui, he should be on your list of people to talk to. He is someone, every time I talk to him, he like enlightens me, like Thomas Edison level of like, I can't believe you thought of it that way. Like he's like, oh yeah, like why would I ever sell myself as more than just me? Like why would I ever do that? Like just being just me is the most important part of I'm coming in and doing it in the best way, in a really efficient way, and there's no bloat whatsoever. And we talked to him at a time where we were like, we need a web designer, we need a web developer, we need whatever to come on board. So we talked to him at that time, and that was a really, really like fundamentally changed the way we thought about how we were going to grow the studio. And now we haven't even thought about hiring a web designer And like, we've talked to developers. We're like, okay, yeah, you want that job? Sure. Like we can just outsource it. And yeah, so we're still, we're growing. And you said, we're a family business, and this is it. I have no backup plan. I have no safety net. And this is all I want to do. I couldn't possibly imagine going back. I feel like I've talked to my friend Travis and Travis Ledoux, who runs Mast in Colorado, and we both joke at like, we're completely unhireable anywhere else. Like no one would hire us because it's like we're too much. Like we do too much.
No role for somebody who has VP of design level skill, but wants to do all the designs themselves. Like that's not a job.
Yeah.
Anywhere
that
else.
means that you can delegate.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing.
Accurate and
yeah.
But so I think in some ways we're lucky. Like I say this to my sister who's like, oh, can you look at my resume? I'm like, I haven't looked at my resume in years. Like that's not a thing that I do anymore, which is nice. So there are benefits to not having a backup plan.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's it. It's complicated, it's messy, but we have the rest of our lives to figure it out,
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something about being all in that really gives you this fire that is constantly alight. And that's why probably going on these little retreats every 6 months is probably super beneficial to kind of adjust your course and make sure you're still on the right course that you set, from the prior 6 months. It's something that I definitely need to do, but it would just be me going to the woods alone.
I mean, there might be some
that might be valuable.
Walden in the woods. Come on, there's a vision.
Exactly.
So it's like when people look at the process document, when we made that public, that came from us talking about. We were like, okay, what can we do to fundamentally change the trajectory of how we're portrayed? And being portrayed as somebody who is open and honest and really for the designer's designer has changed our entire business. Like Perplexity came from Fee, who is a designer who brought us in as a designer. Anterior came from a designer bringing us into their organization. And now we're talking to a few other AI companies, another company that's like changing the way you meet people. We came in through their lead designer, which maybe before the process document that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, because now we're seen as a design resource for other designers. And then they're like, oh, who might be able to help us with that rebrand?
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah. And so that came specifically out of us going away. We brought a whiteboard with us and we kind of sketched out the whole thing. And that was it.
But what's next?
Because you just have to remove yourself. Because if you're just in the everyday, you'll just get bogged down by like, oh yeah, like this client wants that client wants this, how we're going to make money to pay for XYZ. Like if you just kind of give yourself the space to not think about money, to not think about whatever, and you just kind of think about reputation and goals. I mean, your goals might be financial, but you just kind of unlock a different mindset of how to approach business.
That's very true with the reputation and the perception that you're trying to achieve, whether it's through, I'm going to use the word personal branding, but also for the company branding. And I'm curious if those both play a role simultaneously. Let's say Mike on Twitter as like the designer's designer. Does that it seems like it might feed back into the ecosystem of Smith Diction and potential lead generation with other designers who may relate. So I guess that is like two parts of like, does personal branding feed into business branding for our studios? And how do we kind of curate that perception?
My thought, can I go first?
Sure, yeah.
My thought on this is basically the same thing we were talking about earlier with like the same advice I would give any client is that you want your studio brand to be tied to something honest and true and accurate. Like our studio brand is like, oh, we're like a design resource. We're really honest. We're really upfront. We're really creative from the outset. But that's like, because that's who Mike is as a person, is that he'll always give you his hot take and that he'll always be honest if he's not into something. And so it was born from like a real authentic identity. So it's not something, then it's easier too, because then it's not something you have to put on. You have to go pretend you are this other character. It's just a slightly more professional version of yourself, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And like when you emailed us and you're like, oh, is there any hot takes you want to talk about? There came a time where I like sat and looked at my online presence and was like, I'm kind of an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, And I like fundamentally was just like, okay, I'm not going to do that stuff online anymore. Like, I'll talk shit with you at the bar if you'd like. And I'll have hot takes all about that kind of stuff. But online is just like, it's forever, and someone will dig something up and be like, did you say this? And you're like, oh, I didn't really, there was context that was missing, or there was, I was kind of feeling mad at somebody that day, or I was kind of, someone else provoked it, they deleted their tweet, you didn't see that. Like, there's, I still have moments where I'm just like, okay, this is fundamentally like silly, let me like say something. But it's just so worthless to get caught up in like, the logo, is a logo wrong, or is that type weird? Like, there's just no ground to be gained in that situation. And I think that, I'm also not in the camp of just say nice things as well. I don't believe in that either. I do believe in like healthy critique, and the best places for healthy critique are in person or on Zoom, or in text or something like that. Like, I don't believe that should be aired out for Twitter.
Yeah. Well, I also think we made a pretty conscious I think we made a pretty conscious choice to say, okay, let's put out into the world, like, let's try to make the internet less of a horrible place instead of more of a horrible place. Like, I think that's part of what the process document out there, or just putting good work out there, or resources. Like, let's try to intentionally amplify positivity instead of amplifying negativity, which so much of the internet is about.
It's so interesting because we put out the sprints post, which is like kind of akin to the process post. And I caught like a lot of guff on that early, of people being like, oh, you're ruining whatever. And I was like, no, just go read it. Like, go read it. It's not what everyone else is talking about. It's not the same. And again, it's just like the people want to jump on something they don't understand so quickly. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help that I write blog posts that are 30-minute reads. So it's a little bit exhausting to get to the end of it. But I think that there's a place to write, and I feel like our studio is called Smith Diction because of the writing. And even with our case studies, like, I know no one's reading it. Like, I see the statistics that like maybe 10, like, it might be viewed 1,000 times, 2,000 times, 3,000 times, but only 10% of people actually get to the bottom. And
that's fine.
That's fine. But I want to be the person that, like, I'm providing the context. If you want to have a really thoughtful conversation about this, the context is there, and I would love to talk to you about it. But I just want to be clear that I thought through mostly as much as I possibly could. I wrote it in the best way that I possibly could. Chara fact checked it and rewrote it to be coherent. And I just have decided, like, I just want, to provide the context where I can, and maybe be a little less, just a smidge less of a dickhead on the internet.
I am definitely the friendly, nice guy, and most times, and then I'll see something on the internet and I'll write it and then immediately delete it. I'm like, no, you don't need to be a dickhead today.
Yeah, do it. And like, when I was younger, I was just like, I don't care, whatever, burn bridges, light the way, But now I'm just older.
Yeah, older, maybe wiser in that case.
Maybe.
We're coming to that point of the episode where we're winding down. So I want to open the floor up to you if there's any promotions that you have for the studio, for yourselves, but also where can people find you online?
I don't really post anything from the Smith Diction Twitter. I just retweet my own thing. So if you actually want to follow really kind of up-to-date design stuff, behind-the-scenes stuff, like Mike Smith 187 on Twitter is like where I do most of my talking. We're on Threads through Mike Smith. Medium is where you get to read everything. I think it's just Smith-Diction or Smith_Diction on there. That's where we write like our really in-depth case studies that have a lot of context and a lot of meat and potatoes.
If you want pretty stuff, look on Instagram, Smith Diction's Instagram.
Yeah, we do. Like, I would love to get better at doing Instagram a little bit, more consecutively, but I always want it to be like so polished, which I'm just trying to break out of that. But yeah, I don't know. I've been messing with reels and whatnot lately, so we'll see. We have a big brand we're dropping in probably September-ish. or maybe October that we're really, really excited about. We've been working on it for a year. And yeah, so if you're watching this in September, go to the Medium and maybe it'll be there. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll take me until December to do it. It's possible.
Well, definitely check out the show notes. Everything will be linked there. But are there any wise words, advice that you'd like to share with the audience before we close?
I mean, should we just end with "Don't remove the poetry"? That would be fitting, you know.
That would be fitting. I like that. So to the audience out there, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on the journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind, and let's make the world a better and more creative place. Thanks so much, guys. Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, it was so nice.
Yeah. Clearly you liked the episode. You stuck around this long. So you might as well subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you're listening so that you don't miss out on great creatives and episodes like this. We drop pretty much every Thursday, so check back often so you always can be up to date on fantastic content like this.